All right, welcome everybody. It's Wednesday. Thanks for showing up with Miss Tate and to the Google Meet today and having your attendance taken and then getting right to your work today. So this is posted, as you obviously know, just because you clicked on it, in the Google Classroom, but I also put the actual Google Slides right with it. So you'll be able to both use my talking points here as I talk with it, but if you'd like to just look at the actual slides, you can do that too. Yeah, so there we go. Your homework last night, as I gave it to you before I left, was to read this article on conservatives versus liberals. And so the first 2 pages here were on conservatism, and then all the way down to this kind of third page here where it starts with liberalism and goes there. And so your job last night was to go into your packet and to put down 1 or 2 things in each of these boxes for liberals and conservatives when it comes to their view on human nature, their view on change, the role of government, and then security versus liberty. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to that today. So I want you to keep whatever's there, unless it's totally wrong. But I'm sure you guys probably got it right if you did the reading. I want you to keep whatever's there, and I want you to add to each box. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go side by side here. So we're going to hit the slideshow here in just a second. And the first one's going to be human nature. So I'm going to give you kind of the liberal overview of human nature, what they believe about society, and then the conservative overview of human nature. And I'm going to do that kind of going back and forth through each of these ideas. And then at the very end, you'll notice that there's a section here on what it means to be a libertarian. So that's our very last slide today. Before we get into that, I want to give you just a real quick overview of kind of the idea behind left and right. When you hear the words left wing and right wing, essentially what they're talking about is this, is it's kind of a spectrum that goes from a centrist point of view, anybody here kind of in the middle who holds some views on the right and some views on the left, and it's a kind of sliding scale. So here in the normal realm, what I would call the normal realm, are things that people that you would call liberals and people that you would call Democrats if you're dealing with the American political system. In different countries, who is a liberal, they have different party names. So you have party names down here, and on the conservative side, there's a wide range of types of people who would consider themselves conservative. And then there are, obviously, our political party, the Republicans here. Now, this is not to say that all the way far right, it's like all of a sudden you flip a switch and you go from being a Republican to a Nazi. That's not how this works. Or a Democrat and all of a sudden you're a radical communist, right? That's not how this works. What this is trying to show is this kind of spectrum that is the further you get to the right or to the left, you start to become more radical if you go to the left and more reactionary as you go to the right. And so let me explain what those kind of mean here as we get to this. As we start to discuss kind of basic political thought. If you are liberal, it means you are kind of okay with the idea of change. You are willing to entertain change for the sake of bettering society. And on the far left version of that are the people who we would consider radicals. They want to go out and they want to create change in whatever way they possibly can, and that is radical at its very core. It means to change things for the sake of changing something, just to shake things up, right? And on the conservative side, what you have is that same tendency, again, on both the extreme sides of each of these spectrums, is violence, right? How do you create a radical change in society? You have to radically use violence to do that. On the conservative side, their tendency tends to be a reaction to what they see going on in society. And so you have a bunch of people looking around and saying, what do we not like? What do we not like? We're going to react to that. The Nazis, we're going to react to the Jews in our society. And so we're going to be violent reactionaries to kind of Jewish ideas and Jewish thought. The radicals, on the other hand, are out here saying, let's create something new. Let's not react. Let's create something brand new by violently taking and destroying what is currently there. So in each of these things, you don't want to be on the outsides of these right and left wing. Okay, those are dangerous places to be. But anywhere here in the center, don't let anybody tell you that if you are, pretty darn conservative and out here on the right, that you're a Nazi. That is not true. And same thing says for those people out here on the liberal. If you are far left and you are, big into the welfare state and big into socialized medicine and those type of things, don't let anybody tell you that you are a communist, right? That's not true. There's a fundamental difference when you step kind of over that line and choose to be a radical or a reactionary. So that's kind of the basics of kind of a left and right wing. It's a lot more complicated than that when we really look into politics, and that's why next week when I come back and when we come back on Monday, we are going to be looking into the Pew Research and the typology quiz, and there are so many different little variations in there about what it means to be kind of conservative or liberal. So today with our notes, again, we're adding to the homework that you already did in these two sections. So leave what you have, and we are going to begin here. All right, so we're going to discuss how do liberals and conservatives see the world through 4 different lenses. I want you to not think to yourself today totally about political parties. I'm going to try as little as I can to mention Republicans and Democrats. I don't want to do that because the Republicans and Democrats have their own agendas. What I want to have you think about is liberal thought process or conservative thought process. How do we see the world at its basic form? And most of you, if you are honest with yourself, as we get to each of these things, you'd look and say, oh yeah, I fall more on the conservative side of these things. And as I walk myself through these things, I find myself at times agreeing with some of the conservative thought and definitely agreeing with some of the liberal thought. And that's totally okay. You can do that. It is not by any means frowned upon to do that. So this is kind of liberals and conservatives as a whole kind of around the world. If you were to walk into Germany, or if you were to walk into the United States, or if you were to walk into, some other country and someone said liberal ideas, you'd have a general concept of what they were talking about. So let's start with the liberalism and the views on human nature. So this is kind of the top left column there. We're going to go across here. So liberalism, views on human nature. So liberals fundamentally, if you have a liberal thought process, you fundamentally believe that human nature is good. That deep down in our core, that humans are fundamentally good. And that we can then solve problems because of that goodness. And that if there is any bad in society, that bad, that evil, that selfishness, all of those things, whatever words you want to use for it, will generally over time start to fade and lessen because society will continue to improve through the fundamental goodness of human beings. If you remember, or if you've ever heard the Martin Luther King quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, right? There's this fundamental belief on Martin Luther King's part that the world is going to get better. It might not be great for us right now, but it's going to get better, and my kids are going to have a better life. And you can see that. I mean, there is an argument to be made that if you look back at history, people's lives have gotten better every single, 20 or 30 years. It seems like people's lives are getting better. You could argue that there's little points, but you can't argue that. The houses we live in and the food that we eat and the amount of nutrition that we have and the information and the technology and the medicine and all of those things fundamentally have made our lives made our lives better. And then there's this belief that because we are good, that humans can be the actors in the change that society needs, and that human thought and human reason is going to drive that improvement. That we are only getting smarter, and as we get smarter, the world will become a better place. Now, that might sound like all, roses and lollipops and rainbows to you. But there is a fundamental. You can look at history as a the arc of the universe, right? And that we have gotten better over time. There's something to be said for that. Now, personally, I disagree that the fundamental human nature is good, at least on this liberalism point of view. I think that humans are fundamentally evil or selfish at its core, but that doesn't make me a pessimist. That doesn't, destroy any belief that I think humans are. I think we're getting better as a society, but I don't necessarily believe that that's because we're fundamentally good at our core. So let's move on to conservatism. So their view on human nature, again, is that humans are fundamentally evil or selfish. I think we've talked about this before in class. I always use this example. I have a much easier time explaining a world where Hitler lives if I can say that human nature is selfish and evil, right? I can explain serial killers. I can explain dictators. I can explain people that destroy other people. That's easy. But I think I can also, in this case, explain people like Mother Teresa, this nun who gave up her life to go help poor kids in Calcutta, right? Because at our core, when we do something nice for people, we feel good about it. And there's something a little selfish about that, it seems to me, right? I have a really hard time explaining a world that Hitler lived in and saying that people are fundamentally good. Well, how did he go bad then, right? So at its core, conservatism says that humans are naturally flawed and that we are evil or selfish. And that it's flawed thinking that we can save everybody, that we can, through some sort of like government intervention or through other people, that we can save the fundamentally bad, or that we can save the fundamentally the drug users out there, and that we can save the murderers, and that we can save all of these people who act act contrary to what normal society is. We can't save everybody, and we shouldn't try. And it's a tough time saying that one. Conservatism says that it's hard to trust human reason, because if you look back at history, and again, you can do this, they're absolutely right. If you look back at history, how many times has human thought screwed up history? I mean, all you have to do is look back to the different wars that have been started in history. Right? We got one guy who wants to wipe out Jews, and all of a sudden we have World War II. We have a religion that wants to go take back the Holy Land, and we have the Crusades, and thousands and thousands of people die. We have people that don't want to work, and now we have slavery. Right? We have racism that happens because we believe that others are less than us. Right? So it's difficult to trust humans because just look at history. Look at all the crappy things we've done to each other. And they're not wrong. So, move down to one box. And so then the question is, how do we deal with change? How do we deal with change, fundamental change that we see happening in the world? As you can see, President Obama was a huge fan of the word change. The world has changed and we must change with it. Believing in change, right? So liberals in general, not just Democrats, but liberals in general, believe that and expect that change can be a positive force. That ultimately a change usually means for the better. Again, if you go back to what human nature is like, if people are fundamentally good, then people will fundamentally get better. And the world, if you look back at it, again, they're not wrong, the world has gotten and become a better place. So change can be a positive force. And that this idea of social experimentation, trying new ideas out. And if they fail, they fail. But we shouldn't stop trying to innovate and change and become better and make our society better. Liberals would welcome this move to accepting of LGBTQ people. Liberalism would definitely be in favor of getting rid of human rights violations around the world, right? And finding ways in which to change society for the better. Let's try something different because the old way wasn't working. And sometimes, again, liberals won't argue that that will fix everything, but they argue that more often than not, trying these new ideas out will either coalesce our ideas about an old idea and say, oh, well, that was good in the first place. Well, okay, we'll go back to that. But these new ones will drive us forward and drive us into a better society. And again, in the process of this, liberals tend to push for more rights, especially for those people who've been marginalized in society. So you will find that liberalism, since its kind of inception in the 1700s, has been always a push for the people, the poor, the downtrodden, the racially excluded, the people who've been marginalized on the outskirts of society, the people who've been put in caste systems. Those type of people have been always the focus of liberals trying to push for change. Now, conservatives. It's a pretty old movie, but that's Fiddler on the Roof, and there's a song in it, tradition. They are huge fans of tradition. Conservatism says tradition, 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 always, instead of change for the sake of change. If you've ever heard the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, that is conservative at its core, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. A liberal would look at it and say, can we make it better? Yeah, it might not be broke, but we can make it better. We can go faster. We can go longer. We can make it stronger. We can all of those things. And a conservative says, it works just fine for me right now. Some of you probably, as you're watching this, are thinking of people you know, grandparents, parents, those type of things, who have these tendencies just in their own life, right? We all know people like this. They don't want to go out on a limb. It's too much work. I like my life the way it is. I don't really want to change too much. Me personally, just in my personal life, whether it comes to not being liberal or conservative, I'm a big fan of change. I need to do something different every 4 or 5 years. I need to kind of try something new. I need to travel to a different place. And if it doesn't make me happy, then we'll try something else. Now, conservatives will also say, though, that if tradition changes things, so if it changes within the system of what they already exist in, well, then that's okay. If the tradition changes, if we start to add new things to the tradition, then that's okay. And essentially what this means is that conservatives they value the things that they know work. They don't want to throw away something that they know works in order to try something that is unproven and that we don't know if it works yet. Well, it could be better, but we don't know if it works as well. So again, a deep love, a set in stone nature about we've always done it this way. Wait till you get your first job and you end up in your, whatever job you had, and you come in your first year and you notice something that needs to get changed, and you notice something, I know a way to do this better. And you start to tell somebody, and you say, well, why are we doing it this way? And someone will always respond. Always. Doesn't matter what job you're in. We've always done it this way. Well, just because you've always done it this way doesn't mean it's good. But conservatives would say, yeah, just because you have some newfangled idea doesn't make that good either. Again, so there's a kind of a deep-rooted nature within their ideas of change that both groups, conservatives and liberals, tend to look at the other and say, wow, that's weird. All right, so then what does it mean? What does government need to do for us because of our views on human nature and our views on change? So now here's where things start to kind of go off the rails, in my opinion. You're going to find some hypocrisy on both sides here. And that's the best word I know for it. It's the ability to say, you say one thing, but you don't always mean it that way. Like when you apply it to certain things in your life, you say, yes, I believe this. And then when I apply it to this, yes, okay, I'm going to apply it to these two things. But then this one that I should apply it to, I go, no, I don't believe that here. You're going to find that on both sides here. So government's necessary to solve societal problems. A conservative would look at this and go, I thought you said everybody was good. Why do you have society problems? And essentially what they're saying is that liberals, at their core, we believe they're good, but people will make mistakes, right? And we need government in order to solve those mistakes, because government are made up of people who are smart and can use their reason and help people out. Now, when we use the government to help solve our problems, it needs to be for the benefit of everybody, not just for the benefit of a few people. And it needs to be concerned with trying to create some sort of equality. So if you look at this little picture down here, this little icon that I've given you, right? The government kind of helping. We want to help people along who might need it. Move my picture there. A liberal would argue that humans can't really be free by just giving them freedom, right? If you give somebody freedom but they're dirt poor, are they really free? Is someone really free who is not going to a good school and getting the same education as someone who's going to a 5-star school? Is someone really free if they can't have the job that pays them a living wage? Liberals would argue that they're not really free unless they can live some sort of quality life. And the only way to provide that quality life, in many cases, is to have the government help people who need it. Right? Liberals recognize that not everybody is born into a situation where their lives are good. And if not everybody's born into that situation, then how do they dig themselves out of that hole? Some people start way ahead of the starting line, and some people start right at the starting line, and some people are back way behind the starting line just trying to get their shoes on, right? And so liberals recognize, or so they say, that the only way to kind of truly allow somebody to be free is to kind of even the playing field with a lot of these people. And the way we do that is we have taxes. And it pays for social services, it pays for roads, and it pays for bridges, and it pays for highways, but it also pays for welfare. And it pays for national defense, and it pays for those people who truly need services. If a liberal would argue, if you're making a ton of money and we're taking some in taxes to help out those in need, you don't really need that money. You are living a life that's just fine. You are free. Yes, we're taking some of your money, but we're using it to solve some sort of societal problems. Again, the hypocrisy here is that they're not recognized that some of these people who are taking from the government sometimes don't deserve it. And a liberal would say it doesn't matter whether they deserve it or not. They're humans. They should be, helped if we can help them. Again, you'll notice that I'm not talking about specific instances of like governmental policies here. I'm not talking about specific democratic policies or Republican policies here. I'm just talking in general when we're talking about the government. Does government help people? So a conservative would say they're not a real big fan of government intrusion into their lives, because for the most part, a conservative says, I'm doing just fine. I want things to stay the same. The people who want things to stay the same in the world are the people whose lives are already good for the most part. And so a conservative would look around them and say, I'm doing just fine. Government doesn't need to intrude on my life. But they're okay with telling others what to do when it comes to like social problems. So a conservative would see no problem with the government saying gay people can't get married. But they'd see a huge problem when they say, we need to take some of your tax money. So again, a little hypocrisy there. Again, not just on the conservative side, it's on the liberal side as well, right? But they're okay with those things. They are anti-taxation, usually. Not completely anti-taxation. They don't want to do away with all taxation, but they think really that private businesses could do things a lot better than the government could. So when we talk about highways and roads, yeah, I guess they're okay with taxes for that, but they also think, you know what, there's probably people that can do that better. We could have toll roads. We don't pay taxes, but we pay to drive on the roads. And there's lots of places that do that, right? In general, they think that, governments can kind of do that better than anybody else. I'm going to try to find a place where I'm not infringing on my pictures here. Ultimately, conservatives believe that the government providing food, money, resources, medical care boils down to giving people a crutch that will cause them to stay in poverty and to be less self-reliant. They are the people that, a conservative would often, disagree with welfare because, a person just stays on welfare for their entire life. And there's, to be honest with you, there's something to that for people that are mooches. That we probably know people like that in our lives as well. You probably will know one. If you don't know one now, you'll probably, depending on the type of job you get later on in your life, you will probably find somebody that likes to mooch off others, that likes to kind of take without actually giving, right? And that's really what they're worried about. I would say that the mass number of those people in our society are few and far between. I think if you went out and found, like if you went out to a soup kitchen, and you went out to a welfare office and people were picking up their checks, and you asked them, and you said, "Here, I have a good paying job for you. Go work in the job." I would hope that most people would take that. I would think that they would. The amount of people that go, "Nah, I just want to live on welfare," seems to be few and far between in my mind. But that's, again, my opinion, right? I don't have any facts in front of me for that, but I know my own idea. Like if I were on welfare, I'd want to get off it as quickly as possible. Now we have some other, people who are, on drugs and have addiction issues and have mental health issues. And I'm not talking about, those type of people. So again, a conservative would kind of say, don't rely on government. Do it yourself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea. And that the only way to kind of get to a better life is to work hard. Don't rely on government to help you out. All right. So now to our last one. We're going to get to liberalism when it comes to security versus individual liberties, right? Security and being safe versus being free, right? There's always a trade-off between how safe you want to be and how free you want to be. And so liberals, since they believe that everybody's ultimately good, they believe that individual liberties are probably the most important thing for people to have. Free speech, freedom of religion, due process, getting rid of a government state that suppresses your freedom and your individual liberties. They're okay with government coming in and dealing with the economy, but they do not want the government dealing with, here's what you should believe, here's how you should say things, here's how you should protest. They want nothing to do with that. So they are massively okay with the right to protest. They're okay with the Colin Kaepernick situation because that person is just expressing their freedom of speech, right? That is a freedom that we all should have. If you take a look at this cartoon over here, right, the kind of pillars of democracy are a free press, right? A news media that's free to do what they want and not be beholden to the government, right? That these individual liberties are so important. And ultimately what it comes down to is they're willing to allow humans, because they believe that humans are fundamentally good, that our errors will be fewer than not. And it would be horrible to stop somebody from doing something beforehand, which would crush our liberties. Like, it's okay to let somebody err in the face of freedom, right? It's okay to allow, like, freedom of speech, for instance. Back in high school, when I was in high school, I always use this example because it's such a good one, right? Somebody did an art installation at a art gallery where they just took a mason jar, they put their own urine in the mason jar, and then put a crucifix, Jesus on a cross, in the mason jar and just turned the lid on, and that was their art installation. And it offended a whole bunch of people, right? Now, liberals might say, "Yeah, I disagree with that. That guy's a dummy for doing that. What a stupid art piece that is." But he should be allowed to do it. What does it hurt anybody, right? And if we stop somebody, we're really stopping, and we're telling the government that it's okay to stop somebody from saying something that really doesn't harm anybody in the long run. And so they're willing ultimately to have less security in order to have more personal liberty. When we get later on to the NSA, and we get to kind of spying on citizens in the United States, and trying to find terrorists, and kind of the war on terror and those things, as we get to the different branches of government, we'll have some time to talk about that. These are the people who are massively upset that the United States government has had, the Patriot Act, and we can trace people's phone calls and those type of things. They're much, in order to stop terrorism, they're much more willing to say, well, yeah, that stuff's going to happen, but it's a worse loss than if we lose liberty. Now, conservatives, again, because they believe that society and people are ultimately bad, is we need protection from those evildoers in society, both from the outside and from the inside in our societies. And so what we need to do is increase government protection. You will find conservatives often talking about increasing funding for police, adding more police, national defense spending, all these things. And it might look at some point like they are scared of the outside world. And in part, it does come from a place of they are worried about the outside world and all of the problems that come from having evildoers in society. The question is, where are we taking from in order to get security? Are we trampling on people's liberty? Are we stopping justice or freedom from happening in order to create security? This is a Pulitzer-winning political cartoon over here, and I think it's excellent, right? Personally, because I am definitely in this case on the side of a liberal point of view. Even though I believe that there are evildoers in society, and I believe that humans are fundamentally bad, I'm definitely on the liberal side of things, where in this case, where I say the more freedom and the more liberty we have, the better off we are. Conservatives believe that this freedom is almost always going to be in pursuit of kind of these evil or selfish deeds, and that ultimately we need to protect people not only from other people, but we need to protect people from themselves. This is the whole, war on drugs. Essentially, the war on drugs is a war on people, or protecting people from themselves, essentially. We need to find a way to stop people from doing these things because it's harmful to them. Whereas liberals would go, yeah, I mean, it's harmful to them. As long as it's not harmful to others, you should let them do it. And they are definitely willing to sacrifice some liberty in order to have more security. You can see this in the recent protests in the last 4 or 5 months with the Black Lives Matter movement and all those things. You'll see that, people are protesting over someone being shot and killed by police, and then there's some property damage in the, protest, riot, whatever you want to call it, depending on what side you're on. But the conservatives will always point out, oh, they burned that person's building. And a liberal will always point out, yeah, but they killed a person. Like, that's what they're protesting. They killed a person. Which do you care about more, a person or property? And to be honest with you, sometimes conservatives choose the property over the people because they think, well, the person shouldn't have been doing this. The person shouldn't have been exercising that. The person should have listened to the cops a little bit more. They should have done things differently. And again, there's no wrong or right side to this. It's just kind of the way you see the world, right? If you see the world as a place where you need to be protected and government's going to do that for you, then you are a conservative, and I have no problem with you. That's the way you see the world. I, however, fall on the other side. I'd rather have less protection and more liberty, and realize that my liberty hopefully will counteract the liberty of others, right? Again, you can see some hypocrisy on this when you just look at the gun debate. Conservatives are all for personal liberty when it comes to guns, and liberals are not for personal liberty when it comes to guns, because conservatives think that that makes them more secure, right? So they're using their liberty to get more security, and liberals will look at it and say, your liberty is making us less secure, right? And so there's, again, you can point out hypocrisy on both sides of this issue. Nobody holds a nobody holds the trophy for who gets to be most hypocritical in this section. It's just that's the way they believe. All right, so now we're going to get into libertarians. So libertarians are a whole different subset of people. They don't necessarily fall on the left, and they don't necessarily fall on the right. They agree with lots of things from both sides. Their main focus, though, is extreme personal and economic freedom. Stay out of my life. I should be allowed to do whatever I want as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. So, throw a freedom out there. Drugs. Sure. Libertarians are like, yeah, go ahead. You want to use heroin? Go ahead. It's not hurting me. It's you hurting yourself. Oh, you want to have assisted suicide when you have a terminal cancer diagnosis and you want to have somebody help you commit suicide? Sure, it's your life. Nobody should tell you what to do with your life. We should have less taxes. We should have more freedom to say and do what we want. That's the essentials behind kind of the libertarian viewpoint. That government should stay out of any of our businesses. And there should be very few. Again, libertarians don't argue that there should be none, that there should be no taxes or no regulations, but they are saying, listen, the only times you should have regulations, the only time you should have taxes is when it's absolutely fundamental for the safety of society and for the protection of these personal and economic freedoms. If it costs government money to do it, don't do it. If we have to go in debt to do it, don't do it. It shouldn't be government's job. If it infringes on somebody's personal freedom, government shouldn't do it. A libertarian might argue with you and say, yeah, I think private businesses can do roads better than the government, but they're probably not going to argue if government does it and does it okay. They're probably going to go, okay, well, that's an okay use of my tax money. But here's what government should do. According to a libertarian, government should protect the peaceful choices of others. You want to get married? You want to be gay? Go ahead. You want to use drugs? How about it? As long as it doesn't hurt others, you should be allowed to do whatever you want. Within there's a wide range of things, but for the most part, within reason, you should be allowed to do whatever you want. Government should protect private property. Tax money should be used only for things like basic infrastructure and national defense. Most libertarians do believe at least in a healthy national defense. Again, notice the word defense. Not going out there and nation building, not going out there and creating governments in different parts of the world or giving aid to different countries around the world. No, they're not okay with that. But if you want to defend our country, that's fine. They are definitely for promoting free trade and diplomacy around the world. They're not saying we should be isolationists and pull ourselves away from everybody, but they're saying, let Germany deal with Germany. Let, Saudi Arabia deal with Saudi Arabia. And what we should do is foster, really good trade relations with them and have a fundamental understanding between us and these other nations. Again, don't intervene in those other nations. Don't go nation building. Don't go spending U.S. taxpayer money like we do now, giving aid to Ukraine. Right? What's the point of that, a libertarian would say? You're not helping U.S. citizens. You're helping Ukrainians. Well, where is that in the Constitution? And ultimately, in short, it means just stay out of our lives. Which is why I think it's pretty funny, if you have the donkey for the Democrats and the elephant for the Republicans. Libertarians should have one too, and it's the porcupine, right? Just the quills. Stay out of my life. Get away from me. Stay away. Don't tread on me is the idea behind the libertarian viewpoint. We're going to get a lot more into libertarians when we get to the end of this unit and we start talking about monetary policy, because libertarians definitely have some viewpoints on monetary policy and the economy. But other than that, we are done for the day. You need to, if you could, go back to your packet, and your job for tomorrow is to do the homework 2-3 in table 6.1. So that is this table right down here on page 180 of your book. Fill that out. Role of government in fiscal policy, in social policy, and in foreign policy when it comes to liberals and conservatives. And then your job is to read this short article on the gender gap. So for tomorrow's screencast, the gender gap is going to come up, and it's the idea that women tend to vote more Democratic than Republican usually in elections. So take a look at that, read that. You don't have to do anything with it, just be familiar with it so that tomorrow when we go to our talking points 2-3 and we start talking specifically now about Democrats and Republicans here in the United States, how do they shape up when it comes to economic, social, and foreign policy issues. So that's your homework for the night. Remember, tomorrow you need to check in with the Google Meet with Mrs. Tate. Please do not leave until she's told you that she's taken attendance and gotten you down there. I'd hate for you not to get counted. So make sure you're on time so that you don't waste her time. That would be awesome. And I will be back with you tomorrow for a screencast that'll be posted on the Google Classroom. And other than that, have a great day, and I'm really looking forward to being back in the classroom because making screencasts is kind of weird and you end up feeling like you're talking to yourself the whole time. So enjoy the day today, and then be back tomorrow for our next screencast, and then you'll have a 3-day weekend. See you later.